Have you ever wondered what happened in the 1,000 years between the fall of the Roman Empire and the discovery of the Americas? It's a period we call the Middle Ages, often dismissed as the Dark Ages. But was it really that dark? Today, we're going to journey through 1,000 years of history in just a few minutes, from the ashes of Rome to the dawn of the modern world. Let's uncover the chaos, the innovation, and the incredible resilience of medieval Europe. When the last Roman emperor was dethroned in 476, Europe didn't just turn off a light switch. The change was slow and devastating. Imagine the world's superpower collapsing. The vast network of Roman roads, once bustling with soldiers and merchants, fell into disrepair, swallowed by forests. Grand stone cities, symbols of imperial power, became ghost towns. The skill of reading, once common, became a rare treasure. In some entire kingdoms, you could count the number of literate people on one hand. Trade routes that had connected the empire for centuries simply vanished. Spanish olive oil no longer reached Britain. German pottery no longer made its way to Italy. People retreated into isolated farming communities. Their lives governed by the seasons, their primary goal was simple: grow enough food to survive. The winter, it was a world that had shrunk dramatically. But amidst this chaos, one institution not only survived but thrived: the Catholic Church. As kings and warlords fought for scraps of the old empire, rising and falling with brutal speed, the Church provided a sense of continuity. In cold, stone monasteries scattered across the continent, monks became the guardians of Western civilization. They spent their lives in quiet scriptoriums, meticulously copying ancient texts by candlelight. They didn't just preserve the Bible, they saved the works of Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, and the writings of Roman engineers. Without these patient scribes, a huge part of our intellectual heritage might have been lost forever. Now here's something fascinating that reshaped this era. A new style of warfare emerged that would define the next 1,000 years: the mounted knight. The key innovation was the stirrup, which arrived in Europe from Asia around the 700s. It seems simple, but it was a game-changer. Suddenly, a warrior on horseback could brace himself, using the horse's momentum to deliver a devastating charge with a lance without being knocked off. This single piece of technology created an elite, expensive class of soldier. To be a knight, you needed a powerful war horse, which could cost as much as a small farm. You needed custom-fitted metal armor, a sword, a lance, and years of brutal training that started in childhood. This military revolution led directly to the social structure we call feudalism. Peasants worked the land, giving a share of their crops to a local lord and knight who, in return, promised to protect them from bandits and rival lords. Society was a pyramid, with the king at the top and the vast majority of peasants at the bottom, all held together by oaths of loyalty and the power of the armored knight. For about 500 years, Europe was fragmented and defensive. But around the year 1000, things began to change. Europe started to wake up. The first sign was a massive population boom. The number of people doubled, then tripled. What happened? It was another revolution, this time in farming. New technologies, many from the East, began to spread. The heavy plow, with its iron blade, could break through the thick, fertile soils of northern Europe that the old Roman plows couldn't touch. The horse collar allowed horses to pull these heavy plows without choking, making them far more efficient than oxen. And farmers adopted the three-field crop rotation system, leaving 1/3 of their land fallow each year. This dramatically increased food production and kept the soil healthy. For the first time in centuries, farms were producing a surplus, and a food surplus is the foundation of civilization. It means not everyone has to be a farmer anymore. People could become craftsmen, merchants, builders, and scholars. Cities, which had been mere shadows of their Roman glory, roared back to life. Places like Paris, Milan, and London became bustling hubs of activity. Of course, medieval cities were a sensory overload. They were cramped, with buildings leaning over narrow, muddy streets so closely that you could literally shake hands with your neighbor across the way. With no sanitation systems, people emptied their chamber pots out the window after a quick shout of warning. Pigs and other animals roamed freely, acting as a kind of living garbage disposal. Yet, these chaotic, smelly, vibrant cities were also the birthplace of one of the West's greatest inventions, the university. The University of Bologna was founded in 1088, followed by Oxford and Paris. Here, scholars rediscovered and debated ancient philosophy, studied medicine, and explored complex mathematics. This era of renewed confidence and energy also sparked one of the most famous and controversial events of the Middle Ages, the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II delivered a fiery sermon, calling on the knights of Christendom to march east and reclaim the Holy Land, especially Jerusalem, from Muslim rule. Over the next 200 years, waves of crusaders, kings, knights, peasants, and adventurers headed toward the Middle East. The Crusades were a complex and often brutal affair. The motives were mixed: religious piety, greed for land and treasure, and a simple thirst for adventure. Crusaders were often hypocritical, sometimes attacking fellow Christians if it served their purpose. But for all their violence, the Crusades had a profound, unintended consequence: they reconnected Europe with the wider world. Crusaders came back with new tastes and new ideas. They brought back sugar, spices like pepper and cinnamon, and luxurious textiles. They also returned with knowledge, Arabic numerals, which made mathematics so much easier, and forgotten Greek texts that Arab and Persian scholars had carefully preserved and studied for centuries. And here's something truly remarkable from this period. The High Middle Ages gave us some of the most breathtaking buildings ever created, the Gothic cathedrals. Think of Notre Dame in Paris or the soaring spires of Cologne. These weren't just churches, they were massive community projects that could take generations to complete. A stonemason might work his entire life on a cathedral his grandfather had started, knowing his own grandson would be the one to finish it. They were also feats of engineering. The architects developed pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses, external supports that took the weight off the walls. This meant the walls no longer had to be thick and solid. They could be opened up and filled with enormous stained glass windows. For a largely illiterate population, these windows were glowing, colorful comic books telling the stories of the Bible. Standing inside one of these cathedrals, with light streaming through the vibrant glass, was meant to feel like you were standing inside heaven itself. But just as medieval civilization reached its peak, catastrophe struck. In 1347, trading ships from Asia docked in Sicily, carrying an unseen passenger, the Black Death. The plague was carried by fleas living on rats, and it spread with terrifying speed. Within just 5 years, it killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's entire population. That's an estimated 50 million people. Imagine entire villages found completely empty, with crops rotting in the fields. The psychological trauma was immense. Some people, believing the plague was God's punishment, formed groups of flagellants who marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public penance. Others looked for scapegoats, leading to horrific massacres of Jewish communities. Art became obsessed with death, filled with macabre images of skeletons and decay. But this apocalyptic disaster brought about unexpected and profound change. With so many people dead, labor was suddenly scarce. For the first time, surviving peasants had bargaining power. Landlords were desperate for workers. Serfdom, the system that legally tied peasants to the land, began to crumble. Why stay and work for a lord under terrible conditions when you could leave and find another lord who would pay you higher wages and offer better terms? The rigid, hierarchical feudal system that had defined society for centuries started to crack. Then, around 1440, a German inventor named Johannes Gutenberg perfected a technology that would change the world more than any king, pope, or army: the printing press with movable type. Before Gutenberg, every book had to be copied by hand. They were incredibly expensive and rare. A single Bible could cost as much as a skilled craftsman earned in a year. After Gutenberg, books became affordable and accessible. Knowledge could now spread like wildfire. When Martin Luther wrote his 95 Theses criticizing church corruption in 1517, it went viral, medieval style. Printers churned out thousands of copies. spreading his ideas across Europe in a matter of months, ideas about science, religion, and politics that once would have been confined to a single university could now reach a massive audience. The printing press marked the beginning of the end for the medieval world. It powered the Reformation and the Renaissance, and soon after, in 1492, European ships funded by newly powerful monarchs reached the Americas. Opening up a new global age, the thousand-year medieval period was over. So, were the Middle Ages dark? In some ways, yes. But they were also a time of incredible innovation and transformation. From the ashes of Rome, a new civilization emerged. It preserved ancient wisdom, created the university, engineered breathtaking cathedrals, and survived an apocalyptic plague. It developed the technologies and institutions that would launch Europe into the modern age. It was a complex, fascinating, and absolutely essential chapter in our shared history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.